So imagine you pluck a single silk thread on a massive, highly sensitive spider web that's spanning across the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay.
And then, thousands of miles away, the price of a farmer's fertilizer in Delhi vibrates.
Right, yeah. That entanglement is really the defining feature of statecraft today. You can no longer look at international trade or internal security or uh, biological science in isolation.
Exactly.
Like the regulatory ink on a biotechnology policy in Europe is now literally dictating the survival of a maize crop facing extreme heat in Asia. It's all connected.
Which is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of current events, ranging from the weaponization of global trade and, domestic judicial accountability, all the way to the agricultural mechanisms keeping us alive.
And we're looking at the invisible wires connecting them.
Right. We are pulling from ground reports, RBI Monetary Policy Committee minutes, and analytical op-eds from leading scientists and trade experts. Our goal here is to give you, the listener, the ultimate analytical toolkit to understand the mechanics of 2026.
So let's unpack this by starting at that first plucked thread.
Yeah, the geopolitical choke point in West Asia. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz illustrates perfectly how political gridlock instantly materializes as an economic reality.
Right. I mean, U.S. President Donald Trump has indefinitely extended the ceasefire with Iran.
But he is fundamentally maintaining the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports.
Exactly, which Iran obviously views as a direct violation of the spirit of any ceasefire. And, well, the physical retaliation was immediate.
Oh, for sure.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, they seized 2 Israel-linked vessels, the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas.
Wow.
Yeah, and they justified it under the banner of maritime security, but the strategic message is impossible to miss.
Right. If you choke Iranian ports, Iran will choke the entire strait.
Spot on. And the vibrations of that choked strait travel directly into the Indian economy. If you look at the latest Reserve Bank of India Monetary Policy Committee minutes, this West Asia conflict is the absolute dominant theme.
Yeah, Governor Sanjay Malhotra was very explicit here, wasn't he?
He was. He noted this isn't just a distant political issue, it is actively disrupting supply chains, creating severe downside risks to our economic growth, and simultaneously driving up inflation.
Right.
And then external committee member Nagesh Kumar expanded on this by highlighting India's critical dependence on the Middle East for crude oil, natural gas, and the raw materials for fertilizers.
Meaning the baseline cost of living and doing business in India is completely tethered to a body of water we do not control.
Yeah, exactly.
And our exporters are getting squeezed from a totally different direction in the West, too. I mean, look at what is happening with the U.S. tariff refunds.
Oh, that situation.
Indian exporters are currently being excluded from those refunds. It's exposing a massive structural vulnerability in how we do business globally.
The mechanism of that vulnerability is really painful to look at. When the U.S. initially imposed those heavy tariffs, Indian exporters absorbed roughly 50% of that extra cost themselves.
Just to keep their clients.
Exactly. They cut their own margins to the bone just to retain their American buyers. But now that the U.S. government is processing tariff refunds, those refunds are going straight to the American buyers.
Wait, so the Indian exporters who actually ate the cost get nothing?
They have no official legal recourse to claim that money. They are relying entirely on
On corporate goodwill?
Yes, the goodwill of corporate buyers to pass a share of those refunds back, which is...
Relying on corporate goodwill is definitely not an economic strategy.
No, it's not.
And the macroeconomic data reflects that vulnerability. India's textile and apparel exports actually declined in the 2026 fiscal year.
It really shifts the paradigm of global trade. I mean, we used to operate in a global supermarket. You just walk in, find the cheapest goods on the shelf, and buy them, regardless of who made them.
Right.
Now we've moved to like a global members-only club. If you don't have the right political alliances, you aren't even allowed in the store.
Which we saw clearly when China restricted active pharmaceutical ingredients after the Galwan Valley clashes.
Exactly. Relying on a single superpower, whether it's the U.S. for market access or China for supply chains, it carries unacceptable sovereign risk today.
Yeah.
Trade analysts Arindam Goswami and Ashwin Prasad articulate this brilliantly. They argue that India's strategy must pivot entirely toward sectoral plurilateralism.
Okay, let's break that term down because it
Okay.
sounds like heavy academic jargon, but it's actually just a survival strategy.
Right, sectoral plurilateralism. It basically means abandoning the old model of broad dependent alliances with superpowers and instead building highly specialized open source partnerships with equal peers.
Makes sense.
To really wrap our heads around the mechanism, look back to 1951 with the European coal and steel community.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Yeah, 6 nations integrated just 2 industries,
Yeah.
coal and steel. By physically linking the supply chains required to build weapons, they made going to war with each other physically and economically impossible. That limited, hyper-focused integration laid the foundation for the entire European Union. Goswami and Prasad argue India must do the exact same thing today, but with the vital resources of the 21st century.
Like artificial intelligence, space technology, and digital infrastructure.
Exactly.
And you can actually see this happening in the diplomatic movements just this past week. We aren't signing massive, vague treaties anymore. We are executing targeted sectoral plurilateralism.
Right, like with South Korea.
Yeah. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung was in Delhi, pushing for $50 billion in trade, but specifically partnering on quantum computing and critical minerals.
And over in Berlin, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is coordinating with Germany to co-develop submarines and prep for the Tarang Shakti exercise.
We even have the Indian Navy arriving in Colombo for a highly specialized bilateral diving exercise with Sri Lanka, exercise DIVX 2026.
Notice the pattern there. Quantum computing with South Korea, submarines with Germany, maritime security with Sri Lanka. It is alliance building through practical, specialized peer-to-peer cooperation.
Yeah, which stands in stark contrast to the blunt force coercion we see from other global players right now.
Oh, absolutely. Look at China. They just successfully leaned on 3 separate African nations to deny Taiwan's president airspace, forcing him to cancel a diplomatic trip.
Literally boxing a sovereign leader out of the sky to exert pressure.
It's intense. Meanwhile, the European Union is dealing with its own internal friction. They had to navigate a bitter feud with Hungary and Slovakia just to unblock a $106 billion loan for Ukraine.
Right, because those two nations were holding up continental security over Russian oil deliveries. It's just friction everywhere.
It is.
Yet India's response to this global gridlock is to actually open up. We just added 14 more seaports for EVs entry, actively expanding our global immigration access and commercial traffic.
The duality there is very intentional. You secure your strategic vulnerabilities through specialized alliances, but you keep the broader economic doors as wide open as possible to maintain global relevance.
But, securing international borders and building global trade alliances means absolutely nothing if your internal foundation is fracturing.
Oh, 100%.
Applying state power externally requires total legitimacy internally. Which brings us to a major domestic milestone. The Union Home Ministry recently declared India free of Maoist insurgency.
The end of left-wing extremism, or LWE, is a monumental security achievement.
Yeah.
But policy analyst Shashi K. Verma provides a really crucial warning here. Security gains do not complete the journey. They merely create a vacuum.
Right.
If you want to secure what he calls the peace dividend, state governance must aggressively step into that vacuum and deliver inclusive transformation.
And he gave a vivid example of this mechanism in action, didn't he?
He did. In West Manipur, young tribal girls used to practice field hockey using battered sticks on uneven, dusty dirt fields in areas once dominated by conflict.
Wow.
But the state didn't just clear out the insurgents. They utilized frameworks like the PM Jane Men's scheme to build a proper AstroTurf hockey academy.
That's incredible. It is about replacing the economy of conflict with dignified, localized livelihoods.
Exactly. The state must transition from establishing a monopoly on violence to establishing a monopoly on trust. The mere absence of violence is not the same as the presence of prosperity or democratic integration.
Right. And let's examine that democratic integration, because the data tells a slightly different story about how deep that integration really goes.
It does.
We celebrate eliminating insurgency to bring marginalized communities into the democratic fold.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the latest grassroots data on political representation, only 10 states exceeded the mandated quota for women's representation in Panchayats.
Yeah.
And 4 states completely failed to meet the quota at all. Are we just integrating people on paper while failing to provide actual structural equity?
It's a great question. The friction between formal integration and equitable representation is really the defining challenge of statecraft. Passing a law to mandate quotas is, frankly, the easy part. Dismantling the local patriarchal structures that prevent women from actually wielding power in a panchayat that requires a much deeper application of governance.
And we see that exact same friction between the theory of governance and the reality of its execution in the justice system.
Oh, absolutely.
The ultimate test of a state's legitimacy is whether it can hold itself accountable. Let's look at the Malegaon blasts case. We're just looking at the analytical timeline of the institutions here.
Right.
The Bombay High Court just discharged all 4 remaining accused. It had been nearly 20 years. 31 people died, over 300 were injured.
That's staggering.
And the investigation was handled by 3 premier agencies, starting with the State Anti-Terror Squad, moving to the Central Bureau of Investigation, and finally landing with the National Investigation Agency.
The institutional corrosion there is profound. You have 3 entirely different agencies presenting 3 completely different theories of the crime with different sets of accused, operating under shifting evidentiary standards. When state capacity fractures across competing jurisdictions over 2 decades, the result is 0 convictions. It deeply erodes the public's hope for justice and exposes a severe lack of operational continuity.
But then compare that institutional failure to how aggressively the state wields its power in other arenas. The National Investigation Agency is currently seeking the death penalty for separatist leader Yasin Malik in a terror funding case.
Right.
They are explicitly arguing before the Delhi High Court that a perpetrator's political contacts with senior bureaucrats do not somehow immunize them or negate their links to militancy.
Both cases highlight the immense burden of proof placed upon the state. The state has the power to demand the ultimate penalty, but it also has the obligation to maintain unbroken, rigorous evidentiary standards.
Exactly.
And this negotiation of power doesn't just happen between the state and the individual, it happens constantly between the states and the center.
The boundaries of federalism and constitutional rights are being tested every single day. I mean, we've seen this before with the Supreme Court navigating complex issues like Sabarimala and religious freedom, trying to balance individual rights with institutional traditions. But now we're seeing it play out in center state jurisdictions, too.
Right, like the recent ruling involving West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee.
Yeah, she walked directly into the middle of an ongoing enforcement directorate raid in Kolkata.
And the Supreme Court ruled that her physical interference does not constitute a formal center state dispute under Article 131 of the Constitution.
It's a very specific technical boundary being drawn about what constitutes a constitutional crisis versus a localized political clash.
Governance is just an endless negotiation of those boundaries. We see it with resources, too.
Oh, like the water disputes.
Exactly. The Mahanadi Water Disputes Tribunal just handed Odisha and Chhattisgarh a final, non-negotiable deadline of May 2nd to settle their water-sharing formula.
Because the 2 states have failed to present a concrete proposal.
Right. Whether it is river water or investigative jurisdiction, the state is constantly defining its limits.
What fascinates me, though, is how the state is now extending those limits into entirely new, unregulated frontiers. Like the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, MEDIJ, has just made formal registration for esports mandatory starting May 1st.
This represents a massive shift in regulatory philosophy. This is not just about bringing a booming digital industry into the tax bracket.
Right. It goes way deeper.
The new rules include specific provisions to regulate microtransactions within games, and they mandate strict age classifications specifically designed to prevent psychological addiction.
So the government is stepping beyond physical borders and physical commerce and actively regulating the psychological well-being of its digital citizens.
It's an acknowledgement that the digital frontier is just as critical to internal stability as a physical highway.
It is a necessary evolution. However, we must zoom out and look at the absolute foundation of all this. Our trade alliances, our digital regulations, our constitutional boundaries. None of it matters if the physical biosphere we inhabit collapses.
Oh, completely. The climate data we are looking at demands immediate attention.
Yeah, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Meteorological Organization just released a joint report confirming that 2025 was among the top 3 hottest years in recorded history.
And it is pushing global agri-food systems to the absolute brink of failure. We need to move past the generic phrase global warming and look at the biological mechanisms at play.
Let's do that.
The report utilizes a thermal humidity index. When the combination of heat and humidity breaches a specific threshold, livestock enter acute heat stress. Because of this, dairy cattle are currently experiencing a 15 to 25% drop in milk production globally.
Wow, just from the heat.
Yeah, the animals are simply expending too much metabolic energy surviving the heat to produce milk.
And the mechanism impacting our staple crops is even more alarming. The extreme nighttime heat means the environment never actually cools down.
Right.
So crops are forced to burn through their cellular energy stores just to survive the dark hours. For staple crops like maize and rice, this relentless heat causes pollen sterility.
Devastating.
The flowers literally cannot fertilize, leaving farmers with entirely empty husks at harvest. Add in the fact that 91% of the world's oceans experience severe marine heat waves, threatening global fish stocks, and you have a systemic threat to the human food supply.
Governments are attempting mitigation, obviously. India, for instance, is pushing to green its infrastructure by expanding the legal definition of aviation turbine fuel.
The sustainable aviation fuel.
Exactly, SF blending. This means replacing fossil fuels with synthesized hydrocarbons sourced from agricultural biomass to fly commercial planes.
Mitigation is vital, but here is where my mind was completely blown by the research today.
Yeah.
Mitigation alone won't save a pollen-sterile maize crop. Adaptation is where survival lies. And that brings us to the brilliant analysis by scientist K. Vijay Raghavan on regulatory divergence in biotechnology.
Oh, this is such a crucial piece.
He makes a simple but profound point. Humans have been genetically engineering crops and animals for 10,000 years through slow, agonizingly unpredictable breeding processes.
Right.
But today, we possess the technology to execute those vital adaptations at the cellular level almost instantly.
And Vijay Raghavan exposes a massive psychological paradox in modern society regarding this.
He really does.
We eagerly embrace genetic engineering when it comes to human medicine. We celebrate somatic cell therapies, where scientists extract a patient's immune cells, genetically alter them to hunt cancer, and inject them back into the body.
Or how we rely entirely on lab-grown, genetically engineered insulin.
Exactly. Millions of people eagerly inject synthetic biology weight loss drugs like semaglutide.
It is a profound contradiction. If a doctor offers you a genetically engineered cell to cure your disease, you view it as a miracle of science.
Right.
But the second a scientist suggests using the exact same genetic engineering principles to make a staple wheat crop resistant to extreme heat so 1 billion people don't face famine, there is massive localized panic.
We fiercely reject genetically modified crops out of this abstract feel of playing God with agriculture, even as we play God with our own bodies.
The European Union is the ultimate example of this cognitive dissonance. They have enacted strict bans on cultivating genetically modified crops on their own soil.
Yet, to keep their massive dairy and meat industries alive, they import millions of tons of GM feed from the Americas.
Right.
It is a regulatory framework dictated entirely by apprehension, completely devoid of scientific consistency.
Vijay calls this the danger of regulatory quicksand. If a nation's biological regulations are entirely risk-averse, if the government only demands compliance with slow, legacy safety models rather than actively enabling daring innovation, the ideas won't stop existing.
No, they will just die locally.
Exactly.
The life sciences are advancing at exponential speeds. Over-regulating out of fear does not pause the science, it simply guarantees the science happens in a rival nation. And a decade from now, when your crops are failing due to heat stress, your country will be forced to buy that genetically engineered seed from a foreign power at a massive premium. By trying to avoid the hypothetical risks of biotechnology, you guarantee the very real risks of food insecurity.
So how do we synthesize all of this for you? We started by navigating the physical weaponization of global trade in the Strait of Hormuz and saw why we must build specialized plurilateral alliances to avoid being squeezed by sole superpower.
Right.
We examined the deep friction of internal governance, looking at the catastrophic failure of institutional accountability in the Malegaon case and the state's new reach into the psychology of digital gaming.
And finally, we arrived at the existential imperative to survive a superheated planet by embracing bold biotechnology, rather than suffocating it in regulatory quicksand.
This is the interconnected reality of 2026.
The traditional boundaries have just dissolved.
Yeah.
National security is no longer just a question of protecting borders with tanks. It is a question of securing specialized supply chains, maintaining the unbroken integrity of your judicial institutions, and mastering the biological resilience of your food supply.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Let's hear it.
As we rapidly restructure our international trade alliances to avoid being politically blackmailed, and as we cautiously navigate the public panic over biotechnology, what happens when the next major global shock isn't a tariff or a border skirmish or a blocked maritime strait? What happens when the ultimate shock is a convergence of extreme climate heat and a biological technology that we overregulated out of existence locally, but a strategic rival mastered globally? Are we spending all our energy preparing for the political threats of yesterday while entirely ignoring the biological realities of tomorrow?
That's a sobering thought.
Something to chew on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the consensus, keep looking for the invisible threads, and we will catch you next time.